I'm Kent Piquel, and superintendent here in Rochester, and we wanted to have an open opportunity for anybody who is interested in learning a bit more about the technology for transformation referendum that is on the ballot November 7th, almost just 1 week from today. And so I'm going to give a brief overview of what is going to be on the ballot, and then definitely save some time for questions or things that you might be interested in talking about over time. So in order to understand what this proposal is, you actually need to know a little bit about how schools are funded in Minnesota. And so very briefly, without pulling you down too far into the weeds of school finance, most of our money comes from the state of Minnesota in allocations that are basically determined by the number and characteristics of the students we serve. And so there's a general fund that is our core funding for teaching and learning, and that basically is funding that is given on a per student basis. And then there are some additional sources of funding that are tied to students with some additional needs, like students who are from low-income families, students whose first language is not English, students who have disabilities, and those generate some additional dollars. And the vast majority comes from the state of Minnesota. A small sliver, well under 10%, comes from the federal government. And then local communities have a levy that the school board can set within parameters. And then there's the option for school communities to dedicate additional funding to the education of the young people in the community. And those are levies that then have to be passed in an election. And that's what we call a referendum. And that's what's on the ballot a week from tomorrow. And there's basically three types of local levies that voters in Minnesota can choose to approve for their school districts. One is a facilities levy, and that is to build or upgrade buildings. That is not what we're talking about here tonight. That is something Rochester did in 2019 to build 4 new schools and a new pool at Century High School. Then there's an operating levy, which can be used for the core purposes of teaching and learning, in particular, what is our biggest expense, which is our amazing staff, and that is salaries and benefits. That is also not the levy that we are talking about tonight. Rochester passed an operating levy in 2015 that extends to 2025, and we will be making some decisions about how to, what steps to take with that levy based on what happens with the levy that is on the ballot next week. And that is a capital projects levy. And capital projects levies can be used for an array of different purposes that are outlined in statute. But I think of it in some ways, the simplest way to describe it, you can use it to buy stuff that supports the teaching and learning process. So you could buy traditional textbooks, or you can, as most school districts in the state that have a capital projects levy do, purchase technology, which we know is so integrated into everything that happens in our schools and really in our society today. So the levy that is on the ballot would produce $10.1 million a year, each year for 10 years, more specifically, $10,150,000. And of that $10.1 million, $7 million of it would be used to cover costs that we now pay for from that general fund that I mentioned a little bit ago. So the funding that actually can be used for core purposes of teaching and learning. Another 3.1 million would be new investments in technology that are very tightly tied to our strategic plan. So again, to kind of summarize, 10.1 million per year, 7 million of that pays for core technology functions that we and every school district need, 3.1 million for some innovative new investments. Now, if you combine those two sources of local funding, the operating levy and the capital projects levy, so the two flexible sources of funding that school districts have access to with approval from their local voters, Rochester actually doesn't stack up very well when you compare us to school districts that are similar in size and in demographics of, say, 10,000 kids or above. So quite different from some of the smaller districts that surround Rochester. Most every citizen in Rochester should have received this booklet. There, hopefully you can see it with my blur on. And this booklet really outlines many of the details of the levy proposal that we're talking about tonight. But one of the things that I think has been a surprise to a lot of people is a chart that is in the proposal that, again, lists school districts, 11 of them, that are good points of comparison to Rochester. And when you combine that operating levy and the capital projects levy, Rochester now generates $916 per student from those sources. We do have an operating levy. We don't have a capital projects levy. If you look at the other districts on that list, starting with Bloomington, the school district where I actually began my teaching career. Bloomington generates $3,119 per student from those sources. Minnetonka, $3,015. Osseo, $2,716. South Washington County district that's quite similar to Rochester, $2,110. Lakeville, $1,929. North St. Paul, Maplewood, Oakdale is down there with Rochester at $979. And again, we are at $916. Now, if the levy that is on the ballot next week passes, it would not catapult Rochester to the top of that list. It is a focused and targeted investment in our students. It would actually move us up 3 slots on that list to where we would be between Lakeville and Elk River. It would generate $1,462 per student, up from $916, far short of that $3,119 that is available in Bloomington. So let me dig a little bit more into the two expenses, the two uses of the funds that I mentioned earlier. For the core $7 million that we are currently paying for from our general fund, that would cover 4 key technology investments. First of all, hardware. Every kid in Rochester Public Schools now has a computer device, usually a tablet, a Chromebook, or an iPad. Also devices for teachers, which we currently lack a funding source for, would be covered by these referendum dollars. And that's obviously a really critical expense in any school district today. We don't want to go back to the days like when I started teaching and technology was something that you had to reserve time in the computer lab once a month to get to do. We've now integrated that into everything that happens in a classroom. So the first is hardware. The second are servers and networks, all the stuff behind the walls that makes our schools hubs of connectivity. The third is cybersecurity, making sure that our data and our systems are safe from the growing threat of cybercrime. As many of you may know, we suffered a ransomware attack last spring in Rochester Public Schools, where a gang outside the United States got into our systems, encrypted our data, demanded a lot of money to give us back access to our data. I'm proud to say we actually were able to bring those systems back without paying that ransom. And we have since significantly increased our investment in cybersecurity. We weren't deficient last year when we had the ransomware attack, but it wasn't enough. So the third function is cybersecurity. And then the fourth is physical safety, in particular cameras, both inside and outside our schools. We have some coverage of cameras now. It's invaluable. It helps us monitor what's going on, keep kids safe, be aware of threats outside the school. But we don't have enough cameras. And some of the cameras we have are what we call analog and not digital. And digital cameras opens a whole array of possibilities for analysis and monitoring and some other uses that I'll talk about in a second. So that's the core 7 million. From the 3.1 million, that's where we get into some really transformative investments in technology that will help drive our strategic plan. One example, we have rolled out from the beginning of elementary school all the way through high school, a new suite of very rapid, short assessments, screening tests in reading and math that help us identify kids who are struggling and need additional support, and also identify kids who are doing really well and actually are ready for more challenge. And really excitingly, those tests don't just give a teacher a number, they also suggest teaching strategies, grouping strategies, curriculum that they can use to accelerate learning. So those rapid reaction, what we call frequent assessment tests, are one example of the new kind of technology that would be supported by this referendum. Another example is software that kids use to really develop their identities and plan for life after high school. And it doesn't start at the end of high school. It actually starts in elementary school, where the kids are manipulating cartoons and interacting, all about discovering what their sparks are, what they love, who they are, their interests. And then as they get into middle school, they're actually taking career interest inventories, learning style inventories, beginning to really understand who they might want to be in the world of work and society. And then by high school, they are really researching and developing plans, and then applying to post-secondary education and careers. And what's really cool is all of this creates a digital portfolio that Rochester Schools graduate can keep with them and use as they progress on in life. So that's another example of the innovative technology that would be supported by the referendum. And I'll just give one final example. I mentioned a moment ago the cameras that we have in our school and the need to have more of them. We also last year looked at the kind of artificial intelligence systems that can continually monitor your cameras and identify weapons if there is one in one of our buildings, specifically guns of any kind. This obviously is something that is not something we want to ever have happen, but we know the world we live in today. We need to have maximum safety in our schools. And so implementing a system that uses AI to identify those threats if one is coming onto campus, or, and this is of course every person's nightmare, if a weapon is in one of our buildings, the ability for law enforcement to identify exactly where it is in the building can be critical in a crisis. So those are some of the innovative new investments. They would balance the core investment that we need to continue maintaining our operations. In Rochester, the last 2 slightly plus years that I've been here as superintendent, we have cut $21 million from the budget. We have eliminated 150 positions. To put it mildly, that was not fun. Those were good people doing good work, but we made those reductions, and the school board approved those reductions because we knew that we needed to be sure that we were putting this district on a path to financial sustainability, that we were absolutely living within our means, within available resources. We've made those reductions, and if the referendum passes, we will be on that path much closer to realizing that truly financially sustainable footprint for our district. But I need to be honest that if the referendum does not pass, there will be another $10 million in reductions that will need to be made next year. And the reason we are so clear about the amount of reduction that will need to be made is we are using the last $10 million that Rochester received from the federal government for the COVID pandemic to make some critical investments in our counselors and our social workers and providing kids with support as they come back from that pandemic. The vast majority of those expenses being covered by the federal COVID funds are continuing expenses that will need to be picked up by our own general fund dollars post referendum. So it's obviously not my hope that after cutting $21 million, we would need to cut another 10, but it's important that people understand what the potential ramifications of that situation might be. But to kind of end this discussion on a more positive note, I think that we are beginning to see the signs of progress in a strategic plan that is very ambitious and multi-year, and that would be greatly enhanced by this referendum if it passes. We don't have state test scores to point to this year because of that ransomware attack last spring. Somewhat to my surprise, the state doesn't even make paper tests anymore for the Minnesota Comprehensive Assessments. So we have a waiver from the federal government for not having done our tests last year. So I can't share that data with you, but I can share our graduation rates. And obviously, if you start educating a kid in kindergarten or even early childhood, and then they progress all the way through your schools, you want them to walk across that stage at Mayo or Century or John Marshall and have a plan and a positive vision for the future. And we saw some good news in our graduation rates here in Rochester last year. When you compare last year to the year before, the state of Minnesota went up 0.2%. And they were actually pretty excited about that because it reduced a multi-year decline. Well, in Rochester, we went up 2.3%. And what was really exciting is not only did all kids go up, but the kids who are historically the furthest behind went up the most. And so we saw our white students go up 2.22%. Our kids who are low income, who receive free and reduced price lunch, went up 2.32%. Our Latino and Latina students went up 2.78%. Our kids with disabilities who receive special education services went up 4.56%. And our Black students went up a really extraordinary 8.69%. So 2 data points do not a trend make. We have to keep working, and we're committed to keep working. But I think that points to some promising potential in the strategy that we're moving forward in the future. And so that is a fast overview of the Technology for Transformation referendum that is on the ballot. There's much more information on the Rochester Public Schools website. If you go look at it, there are an array of resources, one of which is a tax calculator. And if you go and look at it, you can put in the specific value of a home in Rochester at this time, and it will tell you what the tax impact of this referendum would be. I can tell you right now what it would be for an average house in the city. An average house is now $325,000. in Rochester. And if the referendum passes, that would result in an increase in the property taxes of that owner of that average house of $135 a year, or a bit more than $11 per month. And so that would be the impact, obviously less if the home is assessed at a lower value and more if it's assessed at a greater value. So with that, let me open up the floor. We have the chat and I can take a look there. And I know that Mamsu's been putting some other information in there. Any questions or concerns or issues, you can come off mic and ask those questions if you'd like, or use the chat. And glad to jump in and answer anything that's on your mind. And if there's nothing, then we don't need to take up any more of your evening. Looks like we are not seeing a rush to comment at this point. There was a line in a post bulletin. I don't know if it was an editorial or a story. It was a column. It was a column, the Answer Man column, and they said the school district has had so many tables out at community events to provide information on the referendum. It was a little like a Starbucks on every corner kind of a vision, and it was a good line, and I think it reflected the fact that we have tried pretty hard to get out the word about the referendum, and so maybe that's indicative of the fact that people feel like they are pretty well versed in what this would do and what the issues are, and maybe that means it's about at election time. It's time to vote.
Hey, Ken, this is Matt Gashgarian. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can. Thanks, Matt.
Hey, so thank you for that background information. I got to be honest, I'm on the fence about which way to vote. I did vote in favor of funding the schools. I think you alluded to it. I think there were two other times in recent memory that it passed. I guess my issue is, when do the tax raises end? And I get everything that you laid out. We need it for the staff. We have a fantastic staff here. I appreciate that booklet and everything. But if we vote to pass this again, I mean, another few years, our taxes going to go up again and again and again. And it just seems frustrating that we can't operate within the allocated budget.
I really appreciate you raising that. I think there'd be a couple of things. One, that's why I mentioned that we've cut $21 million and 150 positions in 2 years since I've been here. And we've done that at a time of dramatically raising expectations for what our schools and our staff are expected to accomplish. So we are not putting this on the ballot absent having done exactly what you are suggesting. And we'll continue to make those hard decisions, whether this passes or not, because we always have to be disciplined. So I think that's one thing I'd say. Another thing is that I mentioned also at the outset, the state of Minnesota provides the vast majority of our funding. That funding has not come close to keeping pace with inflation for decades. And so the core funding source that we have has not funded us at anything close to a level of meeting the mission that we have. And so it's really important to keep that in context, because had that happened, Rochester Public Schools would have significantly higher per pupil funding than we actually do today. So I hear what you're saying, that the sort of when will it end is a piece. I think the other point is that's also why I've been sharing the information on where Rochester stacks up compared to other communities and local support for their schools. We are not a heavily tax supported school district when you look at school districts of 10,000 or more kids. And so all of those are, I think, factors I hope you'll consider. I think the final is we did not put a moonshot on the ballot. I mean, this would move Rochester up on that comparative list, 3 slots, and it would have us at $1,400 roughly per student, and that's nowhere close to those other districts. And that was very much partly with a mind toward exactly what you're pointing out, that we do need to be committed to live within our means. And we know that there's people, it matters to everybody, but it really matters to people on a fixed income. And so that's why we've had it. I will say that if this passes and then we need to take a look at the existing operating referendum, and if we stay disciplined, I don't anticipate being a school district where there is a continual need to come back to the voters repeatedly or desire to do that. I won't make any, obviously it's the school board's decision, and you can never say never. Like, who saw a global pandemic coming 3 years ago? So you don't know what the future will hold. But I think that this is all part of a long-term strategy for us that has included not just seeking new revenues, but also making those other hard decisions.
Thank you for your thoughtful answer.
Yeah, well, thanks for asking the question, because I will say that it is a key one. One final point. It's not something necessarily that you mentioned, but I will tell you, we will be relentlessly transparent and accountable for how we use these funds. We will have on our website a separate kind of referendum calculator where we will continually report exactly on how these dollars are being used for the entire, decade of the funding if it passes. And so you will be able to look and you'll be able to see clearly, oh, they bought these many Chromebooks, they made these investments, in networks, they did this with physical security, they have this with software. So we will make sure that people can look at the expenditures we are making with the funds if it passes, and be really clear that what they voted for is what we're using it for.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others?
Kent, there's a question in the chat.
Yeah. 7 million freedom from the general fund. What will that be used for? Is it going to be used later? I am so glad you asked that question. I actually am concerned that I didn't say it this time. I've done this so many times that I may have run past it. Thank you. We will put that 7 million immediately into keeping class sizes at their current levels, and we will sustain that. This has been a part of this current referendum that has sometimes been a little harder for people to understand, because we are spending that 7 million on technology that would be freed up. We will use it to keep class size at their current levels. And that will also be something that we'll be very transparent about, so that people can see that that's where those funds are going. And that's just to finish the thought. Class size means teachers. We will put that in there. It doesn't mean raises. It's not about the level of salary, it's the number of staff. And so we will put it into making sure that our class sizes stay at the current levels. So specifically, what is this going to be going to keep class sizes small? Well, to be clear, we're saying keep them at their current levels as opposed to reduce them further. Now, additional efforts to reduce class sizes are certainly something to talk about, but with these referendum dollars, I know 7 million is a lot, but in the scope of the school district, it's not sufficient to significantly reduce class sizes, but we would use it for that purpose, for class sizes. And the current levels actually range quite a bit across the district. We have targets that we maintain for each grade, and we would maintain those at the same target that they're at today. Class size at current levels is an outcome of what we're spending the money on. That's what I'd like to know. So yeah, we'll use it to maintain the number of teachers that it takes to keep our class sizes at their current levels. The way it works is if you actually cut that, your class sizes go up. And we are committing to use that 7 million to avoid taking that step, which obviously is not a step that we want to be taking at a time when, for instance, we're asking our teachers to fundamentally shift the way they teach reading. Great question. Thank you for that. Any others?
Kent, I have another question. This is Matt again.
Yeah.
What about taxing corporations or Mayo Clinic? Are they involved in paying their fair share as well, as opposed to just the residents?
Yes, this is actually equally shared between businesses and homeowners. And in fact, the capital projects levy, the formula, the way it's designed, which the state designs, is slightly higher for businesses. So businesses will pay in. Mayo Clinic obviously is very unique in our community. They are a nonprofit, but they pay property tax on many of their facilities. And so clearly Mayo Clinic would be the largest contributor to this referendum if it passes, and it would include all businesses in the community. So thanks for that question, really important one.
Thank you.
Well, not hearing any other questions and things, it's really been great to have a chance. I'll kind of give one more chance. I'm really glad that I hope I'm saying it right, Michael or Jake, whichever one of you did prod me to remember to make the point about the class size, because that's key. And then and thanks also for those additional questions that I think filled in a couple of gaps that maybe didn't come out off the top of my head tonight.
Sorry, hi, I'm Jake. I was just unmuted. I was like, yeah, it's probably annoying that I was typing. No, I was just wondering because I understand I was sorry. I had this right in my head, but this is the first time. Hi, I'm Jake, dad of 3, 5-year-olds and under. So this is my first time doing one of these things. Hopefully I get to know you guys over the course of just all these referendums and things you want to do. And I'm really excited to go to parent teacher conferences and go to parent teacher PTA meetings, all that stuff. So yeah, well, and coming from Iowa, we were in a small school district. I think growing up, I had like maybe 12 kids in my class, which was, that's a lot of one-on-one with the teacher, which is awesome. And if it's just like that 7 million, because I know you can't really promise that 7 million that's already being used for technology in the general fund, which that's what I get to. What's the plans? I guess, class size, great. It's an outcome though of what we're spending the money on, which was and if that hasn't been voted on yet, but is there like is it going to go to, keeping teachers or just giving them raises? That's fine. And I guess I have a second question on top of that.
I think keeping teachers is a great plain language way to put it. So that's a great simple way to say it. So we would use that money to not cut teaching positions. Because absent this money, we will have to cut teaching positions. Since I've been here and we've made those $21 million in reductions, we have cut the most away from the classroom. That is, I think, appropriate. The senior level staff of the school district is called the superintendent's cabinet. Those are the people who supervise all of our top functions. We've cut it by 1/3 in the years since I've been here. But you can't get to $10 million in cuts without touching the classroom. And that's why we know if we do have to make that $10 million in reductions next year, we would be raising class sizes because you are cutting teachers. So Jake, I think you've put it really well. If this passes, that 7 million will help us avoid needing to raise class sizes, which comes from when you have to cut teaching positions. And it's also just great to share. I love hearing about your 3 kids and you're starting the journey. I'm at the point where my wife and our kids are all in college or out of college. So it's fun to talk to somebody like you. Cause honestly, I know I'm going to sound like I'm a zillion years old. I honestly feel like it was 5 minutes ago I was in your position. And now I look around and I'm like, oh my gosh, like the kids are gone. So I know your years that you're in have a lot of stress, but it's also pretty amazing. So I hope you're kind of finding a way to enjoy it too.
Oh yeah, the best teachers we have are failure, infirmary, and loss. So I'm definitely planning on failing as a dad, but I got a 5-year-old going on 17, I swear to God. But
I bet.
Anyway, yeah, and just so then why wasn't something along the lines of, so you said operating levies that's used for like staff and salary and benefits, and maybe this is just a personal viewpoint, but why aren't we, why didn't you do like a $10 million operating levy? I guess maybe, like I said, this is the first time, maybe just everybody, I don't know. It just seems like if I had to choose between keeping classes small because we need to pay teachers more, or we just need to get more teachers, or, special education, or just other things. I don't know. Like I said, I'm just starting this. I remember going to school once and then, but it's, it's totally different from being a dad. But then why didn't we do it? Why didn't we go like approach it from that way? And then, and so, because I'd rather pick teachers than over like a computer. I'd rather have, would you rather have AI teaching your kid? Which no, but I'd rather have a human being because, they learn a lot more than just what the teacher is teaching. They learn about social skills, how to interact with their classmates, interact with their teacher, And I feel like that's very, very important too. But I was just wondering why the approach was through technology instead of, um, just raising teacher revenues or keeping the teachers that we have here. Because I would vote yes in a heartbeat. If you said, hey guys, the technology levy didn't pass, but we have to cut X amount of teachers, I'd vote yes for that in a heartbeat. If you said, but we have a contingency levy, which will keep these teachers on, and I would say, yes, please tax me.
Well, as I mentioned at the outset, we do have an operating levy that is not expired yet. And so we didn't need to, that goes till 2025. And we will make decisions about exactly what you just said based on what happens next week. And so that's why there's that really critical pause to decide what actually we will need to do if this doesn't pass. The reason we put it into tech is that technology is so integrated into everything that we do today that it really is not teachers or technology, it's both. And we have no adequate or sustained funding source for technology in Rochester Public Schools. We pay for tech from 27 different funding sources, each of which has its own requirements, its own particulars. And then the biggest chunk of that is the 7 million that I've been talking about that we take from the general fund, which really should go for what you're talking about: salaries, benefits, teachers, counselors, social workers, not food service, that's separate, custodians. And then put it in keeping class size at its current level. So it is kind of a head scratcher because it's all about the way K-12 schools are funded. And there's certain pots of money that are for certain things. And we really do have to have this level of technology support in order just to run our schools and meet our mission. So that was the logic of why we did that on the ballot this fall. It's part of the reason why a lot of those other school districts I've been talking about, they have a capital projects levy because they've long since been tapping that funding source. One final difference that I'll mention, Matt, between the operating referendum and the capital projects levy is the capital projects levy actually increases with the tax base. And so Rochester's property values and number of property taxpayers is growing every year. And so unlike some communities, that capital projects levy will grow as the tax base grows. It would shrink as the tax base shrinks if it shrinks, but that's not what's projected for Rochester. That's not the case with the operating levy. With the operating levy, it is fixed at 17 million per year, and it cannot be changed. It can't increase or decrease. And so that's another big difference between the two. And that's why we decided to put the capital projects levy on the ballot.
Okay. I guess I'll pause. I have another question following up with that now. But if somebody else wants to ask a question, I don't want to be
Sure.
rude. So
Anybody else?
There's one in the chat.
As a staff at JM, having certified teachers is also a problem as well. Certified teachers teaching in their fields. Yep, absolutely critical. And that, of course, is not, we can't use the capital projects levy funds to meet that need. But Colleen, I'm absolutely with you. We want to have teachers who are fully licensed in their fields. We know that we have, like most every school district, had to take advantage in the last several years, as the job market has been so tight, of people who are teaching without full licensure. We do that only when it is absolutely impossible to hire somebody who is fully licensed. And we want to work with our staff to get them fully licensed if they're working in a field where they're not. But I'm with you. That's a critical priority. We actually just had our first recruiter. We got a grant. We hired somebody to work full-time on recruitment for Rochester Public Schools. And you might have thought we would have had somebody working on recruitment, but we didn't. We kind of were waiting for people to come to us. And we are flipping the switch on that and really moving to where we are trying to go out and seek those people, not just who are fully certified, but who are amazing educators who have the skills and backgrounds that we need to connect with our kids today. So a really critical priority, not a direct focus of the current referendum, but absolutely something we want to keep working on in the years ahead. Thanks for sharing that. I know Matt said he had another point he wanted to jump in with. Anything else that anybody else wants to, or else we can kind of go back to Matt and ask him what else is on his mind.
I think that was another gentleman.
Oh, is that right?
Jake.
Sorry. Oh, Jake, that's right. I take it back. I only have my screen. I
That's
can
fine.
only see a
Don't worry
couple
about it.
people.
Yeah, no, you got
Jake.
it. No, that's fine. Hey, no, so do you have like the numbers? I guess I could look them up online. I'm online, but I could look up the numbers. So like Rochester's tax base has been growing. We would assume that not everybody moving into Rochester probably has kids, because I know the state of Minnesota, based on the number and characteristics of students, plus if those students have additional needs, that would increase our funding as well. But then, so over the last 2 years, though, you said you've cut 10 million each fiscal year then, so our task base is growing, and then we still have to cut it. Just, I guess, and maybe, like I said, we just moved into the district like a year and a half ago, so I'm still trying to, probably get up on the past. And I know you've already done a facilities levy in 2019, and then your operational levy in 2015 to 2025. But I was just, yeah, so were those, I don't know, it just seems like, and then you still had to cut 20 million over 2 years, even our tax rate grows. And maybe I don't have the numbers, and I know inflation stinks, but yep.
Yes, inflation stinks. No, it's a great question. Let me tell you why we ended up in that position. First of all, there was the fact that our funding from the state did not come close to keeping pace with inflation. And so when that happens, you got to cut your expenses in order to actually balance the budget. So that was one critical piece. In terms of a growing tax base and the number of kids in Rochester Public Schools, in this school district and in the vast majority across the country, enrollment went down quite a bit during the pandemic, and it has not fully rebounded most anywhere. And one of the big questions in K-12 education today is, where did all of those students go? So for Rochester, we're down from about 600 kids from pre-pandemic. That is not a free fall like some districts have seen, especially urban districts, but it's significant. So that's another contributor to that funding decline. One of the really important and interesting questions for Rochester is, where are the families like yours that have young kids moving in for the jobs and opportunity that are here already, and that, especially with Mayo Clinic's expansion, are likely to greatly increase. The first year I got here, we worked with an outside demographer firm to look at projections for future enrollment. And they said it is really hard to project future enrollment in Rochester right now because there's so much change. Usually the way demographers do their work is they look at long time patterns, and they're able to predict quite clearly what the birth rate's going to be and what is likely to happen with enrollment in schools. And both because of the pandemic, which threw everything out of whack and made it so it was very, very hard to keep doing those predictions, but also because the type of economic growth that is going to happen here in Rochester is also very hard to predict. I mean, one of the things that we have heard from some of our construction firm colleagues that are, here and worked with us on building our new schools over the last few years, is it's a question of whether the people who are going to come in to build the facilities that are going to be part of Mayo Clinic's next phase will be people who live here and put down roots for an extended period, or will they literally be people who come here to do that construction for 2, 3, or 4 years and then go back to live elsewhere. And this is something that actually Mayo Clinic is also in the stages of planning for. So it's a really important question for us, and that's why we monitor demographics really carefully. What our future enrollment trends are going to be, I think over time, it's going to happen. I think when you look at the dynamism of this community and the opportunity that's here, we will see more families like yours with young kids moving in. But it's pretty flat right now. And that's something that we'll be watching really, really carefully. And that is a factor in the budget reductions that we've needed to make. If enrollment was going up significantly, that obviously generates that per pupil revenue, and that changes some of the financial picture too.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, great questions. Anything else anybody wants to highlight or ask about, mention? Well, I want to thank you again so much for being willing to join us tonight, and let me give you a kind of an overview of where we are. I know that We can't and don't want to tell anybody how to vote. We do want to tell you to vote, though. We encourage that. And even if you vote against this proposal, I think somebody who takes the time to go vote is registering their engagement in the process. And so it's something that November 7th is the opportunity to go out and do that, but you also have the opportunity now with early voting as well. And I hope everybody takes this opportunity to make your voice heard at the poll. And absent that or anything else that Mamsu wants to highlight for us, want to thank you again and say goodnight.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.